In this lesson, we'll create the mounting points for our motors. After completing this lesson, you'll be able to create a construction plane and create a sketch pattern. Now that we have the basic shape created, we want to add a bit more detail, things like some visual improvements, maybe some structural improvements, depending on your point of view and how this thing should take shape. But the first step that I want to do is I want to bring the motors into this design. In order to do that, I need a place to mount them. Now these bosses in the original shape are where the motors are going to be mounted. But if we look at it from the front view, the motor isn't going to be able to be mounted here because we need a flat pedestal for it to go on. So in order to start this process, I want to start by creating an offset plane. I'm going to go from the top plane and we're going to bring this up to a point where we think that we're going to have enough space for the prop to spin around and a nice flat place to mount it. So 50 is a little too low and 60 might be a little bit too high depending on where this boss is. So I'm going to start with 55 millimeters and see how that works out. We now have a construction plane called plane 1 and we're going to go ahead and rename this. And I'm going to call this prop mount plane, just as a reminder what it is actually there for. Now I don't need to see it, so I can hide it. And also notice that sketch 7 and sketch 8 didn't get named. If you want to keep on naming each sketch, that is perfectly up to you. If you just want to leave them sketch 7 and sketch 8, then you can as well. And I'm going to call this landing gear 1, and I'll call this second one landing gear 2. Now as we go through this course, it's important to understand the process that we're following. And you don't necessarily have to follow every step that we do as we go along. If you think some things would look visually a bit better on yours as opposed to the one that we're designing here, that's perfectly fine. That the freedom for you to design your own is what we want to go for. However, as we get to certain points, if you deviate too far from the design, you might not be able to follow along directly. As we get to each milestone, I will provide a starting point file, so that way you can always jump over to another file as needed. But just keep that in mind that you're not 100% fixed to the design that we're doing here. You can make changes along the way if you think something looks a bit better. A good example of this would be the landing gear. The cut, if you wanted to leave the extra brace in here, or if you wanted to change the way that the cut looks at the bottom, those are all things that can be done very easily on your end. So at this point in time, I'm going to start a sketch on the prop plane. And I want to start by going back to my original top-down shape and taking a look at the circle that we started with. I'm going to hit P and I'm going to project this and say OK, and then hide that top-down shape. Now this circle right here, if we rotate this around, we can kind of get an idea of how that 55 millimeter works out. So 60 would have been up too high and we wouldn't have been able to get that full circle, and 50 would have just added too much material. So 55 looks like a pretty good number, so I can stop the sketch and create an extrude. Now you can do this by hitting E on the keyboard, or again just coming up to your toolbar. Now for the distance in this one, instead of going a distance that we specify, I'm going to say up to object, and I'm going to select the bottom face, so that way we're extruding only up. Going to join that and take a look at what we've added. So you can see that that 55 millimeter was pretty good because we left a small amount of material here so that we have a nice flat mounting plane. The next thing that we want to do is we want to start to add the information to bolt the motor down. Now with the course, we have provided a motor model. So there is the motor model that's available. But anytime that you spec a design, you can go directly to the manufacturer's website, or sometimes any online retailer will also have this information. And you can get information like the overall dimensions of the motor, the location of the bolt holes, the size of the bolt holes, etc. So in our case, I know exactly what those are based on information directly from the DYS website for the 2205 motor. So I'm going to create a new sketch here, and I'm going to start by sketching a circle by using C on the keyboard from the center, and I'm going to go out 19 millimeters and hit enter twice. In the circle, I'm going to make construction. And this is going to be the diameter of the bolt circles. So we're going to place another one here, and this is going to be a 3 millimeter diameter. And then I'm going to hit escape, and then I'm going to control select both center points, and I'm going to make them vertical with each other. So that's a simple way for me to fully define it. Now there are 4 bolt holes in this design, so I'm going to go to Sketch and I'm going to do a circular pattern. The object is going to be this. The center point is the center of our 19 millimeter, and we're going to have 4 circles and say OK. So this gives me the 4 extruded holes that I need. Now there are a few other things that we need to take care of here as well. I'm going to press C for circle, and I'm going to go out a distance of, in this case, I'm going to do 24 millimeters and say OK. Now what I'm actually doing here is I'm creating a pocket on the other side. I don't want to have a very thick, solid plastic section on top of this. I want to keep it as minimal as possible. So this 24 millimeters is going to be an extruded boss that gives us a countersink on the other side or a counterbore on the other side. There are also some other things that we can do to remove more material. We could put relief cuts in here to get rid of some additional material. And if weight is extremely critical, and in our case it is critical, but we're not trying to save every fraction of a gram, we could start to remove more material. And again, that's a place where you can come in and you can make changes. And lastly, I want to put a circle in the center that's 10 millimeter diameter. And the reason for this additional circle here is going to be the fact that most of these motors have a bearing and the shaft sticking out just a little bit on the backside. Whether it's a circlip, whether it's a bolt or some other way to fasten the motor together, there's going to be some additional things there that aren't going to mount to a flat plane. So now that we have all this information, we can stop the sketch, hit E to extrude, and we're going to take these 4 circles and then the center, and we want to extrude them all the way through. So you can use a distance of all, and that'll take it all through the geometry, and we can say OK. Next, I'm going to show Sketch 10 again. Again, I'm going to create an extrude, and this time I'm going to grab that 24, and we're going to again extrude, but this time instead of the profile plane, we want to offset a distance of 4 millimeters. Now you notice that it goes the wrong direction, so we're going to have to use -4. And then we can use a distance of all and say OK. So now if we rotate this around, what we've done is we've created a great place to put the hardware in to hold the motor. And notice that the bolts are going to be completely sunk into the body. And we're not having a ton of extra material here that's going to make us have a lot of mass in this area, but we just have enough to make sure that it's structural. So now we can take this and we can mirror it. So under Create, we're going to go to Mirror. We're going to pattern Features, and we want to pattern all of our extrudes. So we're going to take the extrude for the bolt holes, extrude for the pocket, and the extrude for the counterbore. For our mirror plane, we're going to be using the front plane, and we're going to say OK. So again, using symmetry not only helps us to keep everything centered, but it helps us limit the amount that we actually have to model. So we've got all the geometry that we need to mount the motor on the front and the back. The next step is going to be to bring the motor in the prop end and make sure it clears our landing gear before we go any further with the body design. So let's go ahead and save so we have a version we can go back to and we can move on to the next step.